And lastly, but by no means leastly, we have Leisha from Leisha.
EA the Daboon.
She is from the Countess, who are an American group syndicated all across Ireland and beyond to fight back against gender identity ideology as it's impacting women and girls in Ireland. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
I think we're going to start with you, Leisha, because you want to explain to our viewers a little bit about what's happening in Ireland, which I believe passed self-ID laws 6 years ago.
Yes. Just a very brief correction. We are an Irish group, not an American group, but we are obviously, we've got relationships with different leaders in the US and Australia, in the UK, but we are an all-women group. We're fully voluntary. We don't have any ideological connections to any political parties or to any religions. So we're not affiliated. We're non-partisan, sort of a broad church GC, all-women group, and we're self-funded. In terms of setting the scene about like the landscape in Ireland. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Self-ID was brought in, it's fair to say, by stealth into Ireland 6 years ago. This is the 6th anniversary currently. People are only now realizing the true impact of self-ID. I think our work on the ground in Ireland has really managed to shift the discourse. I launched the Countess 10 months ago, and the reason that I decided to organise in Ireland was because, like many of us, there were a few little things that were not making sense to me. But like life is busy, and I had small children, and like a lot of us, I'm from the left, so I just thought, oh, it's a bit like gay rights, lesbian rights. Don't really understand it, but fair play to them. And then things kept happening, and it didn't make sense to me. And it was the lesbians who protested in front of the march at Gay Pride in London in 2018. That was my entry into this whole issue. They had cardboard signs that said, the cotton ceiling is rape culture. And I had no idea what that meant, but I Googled it and it led me down the rabbit hole. And, I came up for air like 3 weeks later, just completely shocked to my core. Like, the more I learned and the more I understood, the worse the picture was. And there was no like handrail. There was no seemingly end to it, or there was no kind of good news. So I was talking about it nonstop at the time. And then I kept talking about it at the time I was living in London. And then I remember going back to Ireland and having dinner with some really close friends, like godparents of our children. And I said, look, do you guys realize that this is what we have in Ireland? We've got self-ID. And everyone just looked at the table. They were like afraid to say anything. And from that point on, I decided I had to do something. And so we launched the Countess 10 months ago. Now, self-ID was brought in 6 years ago, but I actually don't think people had any understanding whatsoever of what it really meant and the real impact on women's rights and child safeguarding. And the reason they didn't understand is because then how would they understand when the media was not covering this and when there was no public debate? Like in Ireland, we brought in gay marriage, and there was a full, transparent public consultation and debate. And what people don't realize is we did have a panel of experts in Ireland that was convened to look at this issue. But they actually recommended the medical model, which does have, a panel of lawyers and doctors, and there is oversights. But at the very last minute, with only less than a month to go on the clock, as the bill was making its way through our Houses of Parliament, a handful, 5 different elected representatives on a select subcommittee pushed through the amendment to switch it from the medical model to full self-ID. So that's what we have in Ireland. That's kind of been bedded down it's been in law for 6 years. In terms of our work, like I kind of think we're moving from phase 1 to phase 2, and phase 1 was for me very much about a public information campaign, really, like a public service, like just trying to get out our narrative, trying to expand the narrative, not just that this is a tiny handful of, in people's imagination, this is what used to be called post-operative transsexuals. They're gay men, they're incredibly feminine and vulnerable, they're not attracted to women, and I think that's in the consciousness. And so we were trying to explain to people was that, in fact, in our law in Ireland, any man who wants to can fill out a form, and he becomes a woman for all purposes. There are no caveats in Ireland. So, that includes sport, it includes changing rooms and prisons, refuges. So in terms of our work, I mean, like the first thing that we have a working group on medical legal. So that's kind of working on, there's a barrister and a doctor. And so, for instance, we looked at the Keira Bell trial and the judgment, and we went through it word by word. And then we looked at all the issues that we could address in Ireland in terms of we identified all the statutory bodies, the regulatory bodies, the civic organizations, all the agencies where that there is now an anomaly in policy. So we tried to narrow our scope, because the thing about, because this was all done kind of under the radar in Ireland, we are living with full capture really across the public sector. So I think in terms of activism in this particular space, it's better for us not to try to get into an adversarial trans women. No, they're not trans women. No, they're not, because there's no point. Like, all we have as activists is our intellectual assets, our brain work, our sisterhood. And we have to be really careful how we use that. So I've sort of come to the view that you have to limit your scope. So with regards to reminding bodies of their statutory responsibilities, do you have a policy on this? Have you done a risk assessment on this? Have you done a health and safety assessment on this? And just constantly reminding them, because my concern is that there is a lot of, there's capture where people genuinely think trans women are women, and it's almost a state of religious belief. But then there's also a general laziness, like, oh well, we're sure nothing will go wrong, and until something really bad goes wrong, then there will be a lawsuit, and then we'll have to work it out. And I just don't think that's good enough. These are publicly funded bodies, and they need to grasp the nettle, and they need to advocate for women. So in Ireland, like in the UK, our kind of august official women's representative bodies are fully captured. I mean, they have passed motions that say woman is anyone who identifies as a woman, and in fact have kind of co-signed letters calling for groups like us to be disenfranchised. So on one hand, when we look at the progress in the UK, and because we're all of us, all the countesses are in this, like we've all sort of seen and we recognize the existential threat to women's rights and child safeguarding. But we have to always remember that this is a timeline. So we are just 5 or 6 years behind UK, where they had a public consultation, whereas we didn't. There was none. It was just snuck in under the radar.
How is it been getting the word out there in terms of raising the consciousness and changing the narrative? Is it something that's people are becoming aware of? I know in the UK it's been six long years, but there's been a lot more questions being asked. Is there any shifts happening in Ireland in terms of? I know there was a trans woman, Barbie Kardashian, put onto the female estate, and that hope. Well, I don't know if that helped to raise any consciousness, but are you seeing any changes in the way that the media and people that you come into contact and speak with it? Is anybody?
I would say that should have been and could have been a game changer, except that I'm not allowed to say who that person is because there is an injunction. So we have a lot of repression of in Ireland. So that in itself is fairly chilling. Also, I would say in terms of a cultural perspective, and this is possibly true for other countries too, but it has been a kind of a hard lesson to realize that for many people, in the culture, women who spend time in prison, female prisoners, are so othered by the culture that people don't relate to that impacting their lives. And one of the reasons that I'll never forget our first tweet that I wrote, and it felt like we were going like over the trenches. You're meeting in secret and you're zooming in secret, and then you go over the trenches, over the top of the trench. And I wrote, if no one else will stand up for these women, we will, because we felt like no one's advocating for them. However, I would say in terms of public consciousness and a shift in the narrative, one of the things that was really, really instrumental for us, and I'm going to admit that it really took me by surprise. So I was concerned, and we were worried about and doing work on the idea that an adolescent girl in school would no longer have single-sex toilets if an adolescent boy who identified as a girl was allowed to use her toilets. So we were working behind the scenes, lobbying in terms of schools policy and trying to make parents and teachers aware of the issues around social transition in that context. Little did I ever think that my government, my Department of Education, would completely pull the rug from under us. Like, they have basically moved via a kind of administrative mechanism, so via a technical guide which is tied to funding. They are about to remove all single-sex toilets from every secondary school in Ireland. There will be no girls' toilets to even fight for, to even protect. And so when things like this happen, firstly, it's the kind of chilling impact, the realization of how deep the capture is, that we're now in this upside down where that is normal. That's the new normal. That is okay. That no one thinks that's not okay. But also, every cloud has a silver lining. And that was the day that gender identity ideology stopped becoming abstract for most people in Ireland and came to the doorstep. Because parents do not want their teenage girl in a mixed sex toilet situation in school. And parents in Ireland have a lot of rights. They have really robust rights enshrined in our constitution. We have a written constitution, and under our Education Act 98. So they do have rights. I mean, the Department of Education was trying to bring this in via administrative mechanism, but they can't do that without consent of the parents. So we scrambled. We were lucky enough that one of our barristers that works with us happens to be an expert in exactly that point of law, that area of law. So we put together a toolkit, because I feel like our job is to raise consciousness, to change the narrative, to make people feel safe discussing the issues and the impacts on women and children, but also to empower people, because I don't want to just help the people who are already really articulate and educated and are writing letters to the editors of the other broadsheet newspapers in my country. I want to help the people who don't feel empowered to do, who don't have the vocabulary, who don't feel it's their place, that they don't have that sense of agency. So I think that's our job, is to give them those toolkits to do that research into the law and say, you know what, this is the letter, and you send that to your local school principal and to the Department of Education, our minister, to put them on notice, and we did see a kind of a backtrack. Now it was a bit kind of watered down. It was like, oh, it's not a diktat, but that I think that's disingenuous, because anything, as we know, if it's tied to funding, how else do repairs happen? How do school bills happen? So we're not going to let that one go, and we will. I think it will become one of our kind of core campaigns, actually.
Is there any idea? I mean, has the Irish public had a say, or has there been an idea of what they're thinking with regards to this after this new the issue with the toilets has come up? Is there any way that we can have to judge what people actually think about these laws? Because a lot of it comes in through the back door, doesn't it? It's the Denton playbook.
We did a survey, actually. Can I show you?
Yeah, is it coming?
Wait, no.
Oh, that's why.
There we go. Can you see this?
Yes. It's coming up.
Okay, so this is our poll. We did it with Red Sea, who are a household name. in Ireland. They do all the political polling in Ireland. They use their own precise methodology, sample size methodology, and just a representative group of people. Like all polls that have been done thus far in the US and in the UK, it turns out our position is not in any way radical or fringe, and actually the majority of people agree with us. You can see here, I don't know if that's too small to read, but I can just read it out to you. So this is the bit to do with the campaign I just told you about, the campaign to preserve single-sex toilets in Irish schools. So we've asked public buildings like banks, schools, should they have to provide single-sex toilets as opposed to mixed sex, i.e. gender neutral? Now, we wanted to say, give the option of a third space, but the polling company thought that was exclusionary, which says a lot about the power of the narrative in Ireland. I wouldn't say it was an easy task getting this polling script over the line. The capture is very real in Ireland. So even when people don't think they're captured, it's like fish swimming in the ocean aren't aware of the sea, are they? As you can see, there are really nice, strong numbers for us, 62%, even though they were given a binary choice, which I didn't really want, because it's obviously it pushes people into a corner. They still said 63% said, no, we should definitely have single-sex toilets in schools and buildings. This was a really strong one here. I don't know if you can see that. Intimate medical exams. We feel really strongly this is an issue of consent, that a woman may very well have a male gynecologist, but obviously she is consenting to that male gynecologist. And if she requests a female one, she's not requesting a female one who is in fact male. We had an issue in Ireland where a 19-year-old girl was put on a mixed-sex ward. Now, this has nothing to do with trans activism. This is just a general erosion of why we need our own spaces. Mixed-sex wards are fairly common in Ireland. In the UK, I don't know about the US. It's a cost-cutting thing, but it completely is, deaf to women's biological needs and need for privacy and safety. So there was a girl who was sexually assaulted by a man in a mixed-sex ward, and he was incapacitated. And the only reason that they were alerted was because his heart monitor went off as his pulse went up.
Shocking.
It's the stuff of horror films, really.
Wow.
Yeah, we have single sex wards. It's quite important. They're about 10-20 years that's been in, but it is self-ID. It's single sex unless somebody says that I'm a woman, and then you just move them into whichever one they wish. So I'm not really sure how
same now, I guess.
This is interesting. I don't know if you can see this, but this is really where we get into the meat of the law. So we had to be really careful with our wording, because what we really wanted to avoid was, should trans women be allowed XYZ? We wanted to get behind the jargon. So we kind of predicated our wording on the fact that some trans people do have genital surgery and then some don't. And so at what point should you be allowed self-ID? And as you can see, a huge percentage, 28%, almost a third, said that no one should ever be allowed to change their public record of birth. And I think that's quite powerful. I do think that's where this all started to unravel. Why did we ever think that it was okay to falsify the stuff that the state holds, to assuage a mental distress or mental illness? Why was that ever seen to be proportionate? But as you can see, only 17% agree with the law as it stands, so that you can actually change your documents as soon as you self-identify. So in Ireland, you fill out the form and there you go. You're given a gender recognition certificate. And I have to say, no one has ever been stopped. And people who are on remand for rape, for sexual assault, men who are pedophiles have all been granted, child rapists have been granted gender recognition certificates in Ireland. So
you basically change their identity and therefore their crimes. You know what I mean? It's fucked up.
So we were delighted with that. Now down here, this is really relevant to the Olympics and generally grassroots sport as well. I think this is the thing about, like, on one hand, Laurel Hubbard is a gift to the movement globally, but I also feel that behind, like, what's not being broadcast on TV and what we won't see is local club level, women and girls playing sport and being afraid to speak up when a man starts playing in their sport with them. Anecdotally, I've heard in Ireland that there are men entering triathlons as women, and I know I can certainly back this one up. There are men playing in ladies golf in Ireland as women.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why that's so broad there. Now, if you can see here, this is about access to changing rooms. 27% say they should be allowed, but 49% say they should not.
Mm-hmm.
These two, I mean, these kind of speak to what I mentioned earlier, and I have found that I think we've all countesses have found that very depressing. Kind of in terms of how just people are more exercised by, excuse the pun, sport and obviously schools than the vulnerabilities of these populations of women who are already so vulnerable. Unfortunately, they don't. I think that's why we see these numbers. 32 say they should be allowed to be housed with female prisoners, and 39 say not. So they're the top lines. I mean, I think it's safe to say that we were really happy with the outcome. In spite of the fact that it was a 2-month torturous negotiation to get that over the line. The whole project nearly collapsed as late as 2 p.m. on the Monday, and we launched it Tuesday night.
Last minute went around then.
And once things like that unravel, because we all know how easy it is to be deplatformed. Like, it can be quite damaging in terms of the work, but also in terms of morale. We're all just giving our heart and souls to this work. And so you kind of want to avoid that. Like, it was better to compromise on some of the wording and get it over the line. I felt like, so in our policy, our social media policy, we don't say trans women, but in terms of this poll, we did, because we had to decide what we were prepared to sign off and what we weren't. It was a compromise. So I think that data is there now, but I have to say, like, we sent it to every single news desk in Ireland, and only one journalist covered it.
Well, this is something, unfortunately, we see, I think, across the world.
I just wanted to draw attention to, on our website, we commissioned a piece about the bill. I'd love Amy to have a read of it, or Tanya, see what they think, because and I also wanted to ask them, like, for liberal America, does the fact that condoms are being given out in prisons, is that not the wake-up call or not? They just still don't make
depends on who.
No.
Some manage to rationalize it.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like a lot of people don't know too. Like just regular, people that just don't even know about any of this stuff.
Because, like, when you're talking about condoms and rape and pregnancy, surely at that moment, that's when trans women are women. Like, surely that's when the cognitive dissonance has to kick in. Surely,
I don't know. Americans are really conditioned. They're so conditioned. I mean, I had somebody smuggle out the condom memo from the police, and it still didn't get, like, they didn't respond how we responded. There's some, but it wasn't en masse.
Yeah, it's a bit depressing, isn't it? Sometimes. And do you think this will end up in the courts?
I hope so. At least for an amendment. I mean, I don't want to completely discount anyone's life or devalue the fact that everyone needs a safe place. But this has got to be amended, because safety has to be inclusive of women, or else what is the point? You can't take one community's rights away to provide rights for another. It's crazy. That's not how it works.
And also, like, if you look at the data, over half of all men who identify as women who are transferring in the UK, certainly, and this would be true of Ireland as well, I presume it's the same in the US, over half are sex offenders. Now,
Yes.
either child rapists and rapists are trying to access the female estate because of it's an easier time. They won't get knifed as they might do in the male estate because they want access to women, vulnerable women. Or there's a higher percentage of sex offenders amongst that population. But it has to be one or the other.
Mhm.
Like the stats don't lie. Which is it? Are we really believing that criminal men who are sex offenders would not lie? Would not? Come on. You
Right.
know?
Yeah, it's a real it's one of my favorite questions on Twitter or social media when you're arguing with people and you never seem to get a response to that sort of quandary because it's a really interesting statistic and people don't really want to address it because it's it shows the problems that there are with self-ID and the things that we've been talking about, which is that predatory men are going to take advantage of loopholes that we create with laws that are not really very well thought out.
In Ireland, we have about 700 people have the gender recognition certificate, but our big concern now is that will become redundant as it is in other countries because our equality legislation is about to be amended to include gender identity as a ground, which is effectively what Biden did.
Okay.
So my concern is that the same thing will happen as what happened in the wee spa in LA, so that essentially it will criminalize female, the defense of a female space against male incursion. So if I'm at the local swimming pool with my daughters and we've had a swim and I'm getting undressed, if a man comes in and he gets undressed, I won't be able to complain, and the owner of the facilities won't be able to stop him. And to me, that's the next layer, you know. Like we don't have any gatekeeping in Ireland, medical or legal, but at least there is a form you have to fill out. Lippy, I'm going to have to go now, but I just wanted to say about Laurel Hubbard before I go. I think another reason that it's so good is, doesn't he look like he just put down the packet of cigarettes or a packet of crisps and like got up off the sofa? Like he doesn't even look like.
I think he pretty much did. I think he like just started lifting not that long ago, if I have it right.
He
started lifting, was pretty mediocre, then decided to transition, and now he's at the Olympics.
Yeah. He's
anyway, I'm gonna have to go. So lovely to meet you all. Hopefully we can stay in touch.
Bye, Lisa.
Bye.
Yeah, we'll have you back anytime, Leisha. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks a million. Thank you.
Bye.